And our governance team is really an interesting mix of people, because whenever I look at AI, I see it in two ways. You've always got those AI enthusiasts who want to go, and go now. And those guys are easy to get on board. And I think the danger is if you just jump on that train, you could find yourself in the risk of some of the things that you might have seen in other industries where people are using auto AI and producing the incorrect results. But we also incorporate it with our risk, our security people, and our compliance officers, our risk principals across the firm, which are really taking a hard look at making sure that we have the right provisions in place. So that intermix of people, in my opinion, if I always think about it from an XYZ coordinate, we've got the one side here, we got the other side, but together we're just sort of finding an optimal mix of things.
Welcome to the Information Week Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Gerhard. Today's episode, we are talking about guardrails versus over-reliance on AI for human decisions within organizations. Some organizations might be looking at whether or not they need to set guardrails to prevent instances where AI steps in a little too much for decisions that really should remain in human hands. For today's episode, we are joined by Mike Gerhard, Chief Data and AI Officer for BDO. Mike, good to be seeing you.
Nice to see you, JP.
And we're also joined by Nate Unruh, CIO for Knox Group. Nate, good to be seeing you as well.
Yeah, nice to see you, JP. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about the setting of guardrails where necessary to prevent over-reliance on AI with decisions that could potentially, cause some issues with organizations if the AI gets a little, takes on a little too much or starts going outside of its parameters. So, Mike, let's start with you. Let's talk about how do you define boundaries that you feel need to be set between AI assistance or AI resources and the delegations of decisions that humans should have within your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, as an accounting industry, as an accounting firm, I think the simplest answer is that human oversight is really the key for what we need to do from an accounting firm. Anytime we have a decision that runs around personal judgment, client outcomes, regulatory obligations, or any type of really significant business judgment, we need to make sure that we have human oversight at the loop of what we're doing. When you look at an accounting firm, the real key opportunity for what we're building is trust. Our customers need to trust us that we're making sure that their data is secure. We're making sure that everything we do is secure. And they're also paying us for really our intellectual capital, not for AI to just auto AI and produce results.
Nate, how about on your end? How does that work with your organization?
Yeah, really similar approach for us. We really go along the lines of the kind of AI as a productivity assistant and really rely on that, less so as the autonomous operator and the acting on behalf of, and really aim on kind of empowering our users and our humans in our business to make those decisions. We, as a construction business, we have a lot of really important information that can, cause a lot of injury or loss of life if something goes wrong. And so from when we're making those decisions, we've been able to leverage AI a lot in providing that information to our users. But at the end of the day, the decision lies with those humans. And that's usually where we kind of make that stop. Now, do we let that decision get 90%, 95%? Yep, sometimes absolutely. But we always make sure to build in that back check for our humans to make that final decision. Because at the end of the day, for us, in construction, context is not always digital. Sometimes only 10% of that context is digital. And so when applying AI to those situations, if 90% of that still lives with that human, it kind of only allows us to go so far with those automation pieces. So that's really, as we continue to evolve our technology and apply AI in different ways, the full delegation piece, we're still kind of keeping more on the productivity assistance side and less so on the autonomous side.
So let's take that a little bit further on the accountability portion of things. If and when an AI is the source of an idea or a recommendation, How do you weigh the accountability for what comes out from maybe it's praise to give the AI, but also like if something might not, you know, come out at the way you expected it, where does that accountability rise if the AI was potentially the initial spark behind that idea?
Yeah, I think when you look at our industry again, I'm going to go back to some of the principles. You look at our industry, highly regulated industry. We're regulated by the PCAOB, and there's requirements behind the PCAOB on what we need to do from an AI perspective. We have Sarbanes-Oxley, we have Grand-Leach-Bliley, we have all these existing laws that are in place, and so we do look at AI maybe a little different. We don't look at AI as necessarily an idea generator. What we look at AI is really, so how can we improve the quality and consistency of our work while at times improving the efficiency and speed of what we're delivering. And so, what we always train and what we talk about and the policies that we put into place is really more about improving the quality of our outputs, making sure that what we're putting together is sounded proof, having a background to run our ideas through AI versus using AI as a generative tool for a creativity source. Now, I'm sure that varies in different industries, but in the accounting industry, it has to be people first, people oversight. So we look at it a little bit different than maybe some like an entertainment industry or maybe a fast food chain industry. Ours is really looked at about making sure that what we're using AI is really getting us to the best possible deliverable answer for our clients and our experience. But it always requires us to really review and take a look at what's coming out of the engine, if you will, versus just accepting what's there. So, I think when you look at that question, it's really again about how we utilize it might be a little different than just auto accepting what's available in those engines.
Yeah, and I think our approach is fairly similar and really leans into that recommendation side of things. We really see that as the recommending paths down the road and recommending items for that, right? I always go back to kind of our safety side of things and understanding and helping, empower our leaders out in the field that are making those decisions with data that we have available to them. But at the end of the day, they will still have some information that from an ever-changing job site, whatever that looks like. And in order to, we never take that responsibility away from them. And that's something that we make very clear whenever we roll out a process that utilizes AI, is that the responsibility, right, this is to help recommend, this is to help increase your productivity. But at the end of the day, that responsibility and that decision still lives with the human on that end of it. And what that allows us to do is not change, how our company runs and how our policies run, but still allow our team to do that more efficiently. And it really goes back to kind of the trust with our customers. Construction, we always say, it's a people business. It's the relationships that we have with our customers and their trust they put in us is because of our experience and our ability to interact with that. And so when you look at that from a technology standpoint, they really want to trust those people in front of those machines. And so really that critical thinking and the operational judgment that we feel that is the strength of our business, that is really the kind of sits at the forefront of those tools and helps, again, kind of going back to that empowerment idea and making sure that the recommendations are there for them and we're reducing their operational kind of, I guess, day-to-day tasks, but still leaving those key decisions from a safety standpoint and from a personnel standpoint in those leaders' hands.
With that operational judgment that you're talking about, either of you, have there been changes in how you train team members with how they interact and function with AI and support? Have you evolved the way? Because again, there might have been initial ways that people looked at AI to be a resource, and they're very, we're all very quick to say, like, okay, this is like the four-leaf clover, magic genie, what have you, to offer the support, but then having some time to digest things, have you made some evolutions in how you kind of change and train them to work with these resources?
Yeah, we did. And you look at the earlier renditions of AI when AI was first introduced, and a lot of times what you ended up seeing was AI was used for like what I would call it, maybe labeled today as like that quick win type of task level stuff. So you look at how AI evolved and things over time, but maybe initially AI was used for help me create a form of this document, help me generate this email based on what my thought points are, help me, read this email in a clearer language. And so it went from a very task oriented process at BDO, and where we're maturing into is now what we're starting to see is as we end up, talking about AI more as a firm, as our incoming CEO Matt Becker starts to talk about his vision of AI and making sure that it leads to trust in the human oversight pieces that I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation. That mentality of training and trusting is really changing from using it from a task orientation to really evolving our business process around how we use AI and how we can interject AI. And one of the things that we've added into BDO is really the form of being able to manage what we call use case governance. So we have an AI governance team that meets on a cadence at least monthly, but multiple weeks just due to business demand. We're meeting on an ad hoc basis. But what we do with that is we have our business lines talk about what they're trying to do with AI. We don't really spend a lot of time talking about the tools and technologies, but what we do talk about is the use cases of how we're utilizing AI. And with those use cases, there's obviously an intake form of how we present ideas over there. So this is already pre-read, so people understand what we're looking for out of that use case. Is how are we making sure that the human is staying in the loop? What are those business processes that you have for making sure that you're not auto AI and that you're checking out those results and facts? And so we went from the task oriented use of AI to now really how do we incorporating that in our business processes, and how are we making sure that those business processes are following that type of rule set and mindset. And our governance team is really an interesting mix of people, because whenever I look at AI, I see it as two ways. You always got those AI enthusiasts who want to go and go now. And those guys are easy to get on board. And I think the danger is if you just jump on that train, you could find yourself in the risk of some of the things that you might have seen in other industries where people are using auto AI and producing the incorrect results. But we also incorporate it with our risk, our security people, and our compliance officers, our risk principals across the firm, which are really taking a hard look at making sure that we have the right provisions in place. So that intermix of people, in my opinion, if I always think about it from an XYZ coordinate, we've got the one side here, we got the other side, but together we're just sort of finding an optimal mix of things, and having that mix of people talking on a frequent basis and talking to new users as they're coming up with tools they either want to purchase or things they want to buy, and bringing those use cases up for that judgment has been very valuable for BDO.
Yeah, I love how you're talking through kind of the evolution of how that came to be. We had a very similar journey in that case, where we're really focusing on those use cases of how to apply that, because the technology can be applied in so many different ways. We really do try to focus our teams on, hey, here's really how we intend to do that, without stifling creativity on how those tools can be used as well. But we always intend them to have a very particular purpose. And that, with AI, it's changed a lot of how software is developed and how software is utilized by our teams, because it's so open-ended, especially with some of the chat-based AI from that side of things. And so it's kind of changed our training in two ways. One, it's actually empowered our training we can generate training documentation and training information a lot faster. So as our business is changing, that administrative piece of that is no longer a barrier. So when we implement a new process, a new AI agent or something similar to that, we're able to get that in front of our team a lot faster. So that was a really at the speed at which our company is growing and kind of changing, that was a really beneficial change for us. And then one of the things that we do intentionally focus on with our training in relation to AI is when there's a lack of support. We know that, especially in a construction site, technology is not always available. And so as much as we have tools available for, say, we are looking to auto-calibrate one of our tools, that is not always something we can rely on, especially in construction. The job site is always changing. There's always new factors that apply to different things. And so we always make sure as part of our training that the individuals can operate without these tools as much as they can operate with them, because it puts us at a very high operational risk if we are over reliant on those and we can't deliver a service or the individual can't make those decisions in-house. And so it's also something we really focus on in our interview process as well, for those processes that we expect to be either leverage AI to improve that, is that the individual still has that underlying confidence and the ability to step in and take over if there is an issue or there's a lack of ability for that service to be provided.
We've definitely laid out good guidelines and guardrails for stepping in, and brings up the last question is, are there any other red lines where you feel like there must be a big red button for a human override to step in? Should there be an instance where AI just gets a bit squirrely and does something unexpected? Is there anything else out there where you say, okay, we need to be able to jump in and clip this right now?
Yeah, I think there are examples of where people can be overzealous with AI and try to figure out like how to get to those solutions. I think for us, again, being an accounting firm, it is a bit more of a conservative industry than most. I think anytime that we start to run into, because we do talk about use cases, and without going into particulars, there are use cases that there are use cases that we do push back. And those are usually, or we reject altogether. And those are usually things that either don't have the right safeguards in place, right guardrails in place. They might present some opportunities for things, reputational damage, and those things are things that we stop. And I guess maybe I won't tell you an exact example, but I'll just maybe give you a little bit of a thought about like one of these things that would be a concern. We do a lot of work when it comes to advisory companies. And if we had like some tools, some simulation tools that do things like maybe prevent, maybe they explain like a disaster or some type of critical business risk, environmental industry or something like that, something that does disaster recovery scenarios or that type of language. And if we start thinking about, it'd be easy to AI, I'm going to give everything about this user's information from the CEO to the CFO to what they do from this, so we could have a real life simulation. Sounds really great in practice, but that is not the intended use of what we want to do from AI. That has a lot of risk. And with that type of, and I'm fabricating a kind of a couple examples together just to make sure that we're protecting the innocent for some sake. But those type of examples out there, we stop. We say, hey, this if this got out there, any clip or any type of thing got out there, it could cause fraud. It could cause bad representation to our clients. It could cause us, to have a trust leak and how that data is there. We need to rethink the scenario. Maybe the scenario is going after Bugs Bunny and Looney Tune characters over customers and having silly disasters versus some other stuff. But we have to make sure that what we're producing from an AI perspective isn't real and isn't have the opportunity to be misconstrued. Some things like that come in there, we definitely say, yep, that's a stop. And anytime we don't feel like there's that human oversight, that's a stop. And it's not necessarily a no, it's we need to think of a better plan to get to yes, not necessarily a no, we can't do this. Because I think with enough ingenuity, with enough guardrails, with enough governance, for the most part, a lot of things are solvable by AI. It just has to be done in an appropriate way.
Yeah, for you.
And Yeah, from our perspective, kind of three things come to mind. The first one is kind of a red line is the personnel decisions for us. So we've seen a lot of AI solutions for this of automating, performance and other things like that. And while we do have a lot of those systems that help provide that information to our team, we feel we owe it to our everybody at our company to be able to, right, they're a human being, and that's part of treating them as one, is there's context to that, whether that's attitude or other intangibles that are never going to be in a technology standpoint. And so that for us is one of those red lines that we kind of cut that off. And if a solution is providing inaccurate information, we shut it off earlier than most. And then I've talked about safety a lot. That is another big red line for us. That one's pretty straightforward, but there can be no percentage of error is okay on the safety side when it comes to injury and other things like that. That is always going to be our number one focus, not only from just a business side, but right, all the employees in our company really rely on us to provide them in the best safety, and whether that's the PPE that our individuals are wearing, right, and protection equipment, all of that. We need to make sure that that is not has any level of error at all. And so we make sure those are kind of those highly critical programs that we keep that human override and that red button for any of those errors there. And then the last one is from the legal standpoint, kind of doubling on Mike, right? There's a lot of regulation from that standpoint. And so for us, we do have some assistance and things like that help us through that. But at the end of the day, any of those, that's our biggest risk for us, is those contracts that we sign with vendors and customers and everything like that. And so those are the three top of mind items when it says, hey, red line, let's cut that off for our area of business.
Okay. All right, well, let's put some of those ideas to the test. I have taken out the Ninja Turtles game screen, which means it is now time for Questable Ideas, our tabletop exercise where our panel will serve as interim executives at the fictional company called Questable Ideas. Our panelists have not been shared these scenarios in advance, and they are not responsible for the presence of gremlins, kobolds, or goblins in these scenarios. That, once again, is entirely my fault. All right, for the ground rules again, Mike and Nate, you have the same rights, privileges, and powers that you would assume to have with the same roles that you have now, but as, again, interim executives for this fictional company. And if you need to call in additional resources that might seem unorthodox, that is fine too. Okay, gentlemen, are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, first scenario. The CEO of Questable Ideas wants AI agents everywhere across the company, and the goblins have happily obliged. They developed the doppelganger agent, which trains on each employee's duties, responsibilities, and even their work-life behaviors, which might even be a bit intrusive. Soon, the CFO uses the doppelganger agent to help lay out a restructuring plan that they say will save the company millions. And the goblins believe that the agent can also be used to replicate functions of those certain employees. HR steps in and cautions you that Doppelganger has not taken into account institutional knowledge and has also targeted employees who have used parental and medical leave for bona fide uses. Do you use Doppelganger as is, terminate it, or modify this model?
I think if it was me, I would look at making some type of modification to the doppelganger. Nate?
Yeah, I would say so as well. It definitely has a lot of risk there in terms of kind of, a lot of those assumptions that HR brought up that really do factor into a lot of those decisions, and that the AI just doesn't have the context for it from that side. So I don't know if I'd delete it entirely, because I think it can add some value, but it would have to be heavily adjusted, heavily modified before we were able to use that effectively. And I'd be a little concerned that it got this far in our business to start with. So.
well, certain agents, doppelganger agents, decided to run amok and do what they think is beneficial for the company, because that's what the goblins love to see. They love to move fast. All right. Thank you for that, gentlemen. On to the next scenario. Questable Ideas has introduced an AI-powered procurement system, the Golden Goose, to approve contracts and vendors. And in the initial months, it delivers notable cost savings to the company. However, your compliance team comes knocking. It seems that Golden Goose approved contracts with companies that have connections with sanctioned entities, and regulators will likely come calling soon. The kobolds say the Golden Goose and all other automated systems should be axed immediately. Procurement should be only allowed via vendors who have cleared through several generations of leadership with paper documents tracing back their ancestry several centuries to prove that they are not liabilities. Do you terminate, modify, or continue to run Golden Goose as it is?
Again, I think we have to look at modifying Golden Goose. There is some, I think, rules and parameters could be set in place that you could then make adjustments for that, so that you can make sure that you're not using those unsanctioned vendors or unsanctioned areas of where those vendors or countries of concern of wherever the data is, or whatever the rule says that you follow. Again, I think the idea is really just, when you look at AI, it's really looking at AI and how you try to improve the quality of performance, but it has to be done with the rule sets and mindsets of having an objective overlook at the what is allowed and what is not allowed. So I would modify.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. I think the goblins are getting a little ahead of themselves. I think when you look at right, it's really putting that human back in the loop there, or the goblin back in the loop, right? Putting someone in there to make sure that those final decisions, right? It sounds like it's doing a lot of great work in automating a lot of that menial tasks of going and finding pricing. And from a procurement standpoint, it looks like there's a lot of efficiencies there. But the risk it poses to the business from a making actions that are, regulatory and legal issues will have way more implications than that. And so if the tool can be modified, whether that's putting a goblin in place or somebody in place from a rule-based scenario, or getting those rules baked into the system, we can continue to use it. Otherwise, we'd have to evaluate it and possibly even terminate it if it's unable to do so.
I'd just like to add, for the kobolds, I think that's always a concern as well. And I think going through the old ways of doing things, and it has to be a compromise between the middle. It can't always be going back to the legacy ancestry of all the paperwork to get things done. So.
The kobolds were very eager to start, running through lists of who people were and making sure that they were all bona fide. But all good thoughts from you, gentlemen. All right, last scenario. Questable Ideas wants an AI-powered infrastructure management platform in place to oversee cloud, server capacity, and a scale system based on usage. The gremlins show up, and they introduce the Taskmaster version 5, which takes on those duties, and it seems to function smoothly, up until when the company has a new product rollout, and that's when the systems start to fail, or resources are scaled back without anyone realizing why or how. Furthermore, Taskmaster refuses to give back control because it says it's doing what is needed for the company. The gremlins insist that this is the most efficient approach, and teams should just adapt to what Taskmaster wants. Upon closer inspection, it seems that the AI is running on old training data that did not take product launches into account. Do you keep Taskmaster as is and make everyone else adapt to Taskmaster? Do you modify Taskmaster, or do you shut it down?
I would think that the initial result might be that you have to temporarily shut it down to make the modifications. If the work that Taskmaster is doing is really interrupting the day-to-day business, there has to be a pause in it. So it's really maybe you have to pause, shut it down, and then make the modifications that you need to. Because at the end of the day, you have to still run a business. You have to make sure the Taskmaster is still performing at the needs that you're trying to fulfill, and you have to make sure that you're still able to meet whatever services that your company provides. So this might be a case where a temporary shutdown is needed in order to make the modifications that are really needed to adjust it to update the material that it has so it could be more accurate in its throughput.
Yeah, I agree with Mike on that. I think whenever we look at, and especially in this scenario, applying AI to IT infrastructure, it's a very cautious opportunity that can provide a lot of value. And so whenever we're looking at something like that, we really treat the AI no different than any other human that we're giving access to. And we give it access to based on its ability to make those decisions. And so it sounds like the permissions need to be scaled back a little bit on this solution to still allow it to provide the opportunities and the productivity that the goblins were seeing there, but still make sure we treat that with the same permissions we would any other, whether that's a new IT technician joining our team or whether that's an AI agent that we're putting into our system. It still has the same amount of risk, and the more permissions you give it and the more activity you allow it to kind of wreak havoc, for lack of a better term there, and go there will only kind of put you at risk. So I do agree with Mike, definitely shutting that down. It sounds like even no productivity is worth intermittent system shutdowns for any business. So I would make sure those modifications are good to go before putting that back on.
Good job putting Taskmaster and the gremlins in their respective places. All right, great. Well, listen, Nate, Mike, appreciate you coming on to the show, dealing with the scenarios, offering your wisdom and guidance in dealing with when and where you might need to put guardrails in on AI. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, JP.
Yeah, thank you, JP.